Okay, we can start now.
All right. Hello, welcome to Balticon Programming. I'm Anne Gray. I'm the moderator of this panel, which is called Ethics and Robotics. I hope we're going to have a fun discussion. I think we are. We've already talked a little bit amongst ourselves by email. I want to start off by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves a little bit. I'll start by just saying that after I got my master's in systems design engineering, I had the good luck to get a job at an artificial intelligence company where I worked in understanding the human factors, the human interaction with robotics for future combat systems. So let's start with John. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Ashmead. I'm a frequent presenter at these conventions. I'm doing a talk tomorrow on artificial intelligence, past, present, and futures. And many of the futures have ethical implications in them, which I'm going to be sharing with you today. It's a very subtle and interesting concept, and I think a very fluid one. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun going through it.
Great. Yeah. Marie?
Hi, I'm Marie Vibbert, and I'm a science fiction writer. And I think Asimov was definitely what got me into science fiction. So I've always loved robots, and I've always loved dealing with ethical problems as sort of the seed of story. And I guess that's what I bring to the discussion. I write a lot of stories.
Great. Hopefully we all have. Aaron, you're muted right now.
Okay. My name is Aaron M. Roth. I am a science fiction author. I also hold a Master of Science in Robotics from Carnegie Mellon, and I'm currently doing a PhD at the University of Maryland in computer science, focusing on AI and robotics. My research focuses sometimes on AI safety and other topics which are related to ethics. I've also worked at AI companies, and I'm giving a talk on Sunday called When AI Goes Awry, which is sort of related as well.
Great. Yeah, Carnegie Mellon is one of the most exciting programs in robotics in the country. So if you're interested in robotics, definitely check that out. So let me start in the classic format by reading the description of our panel. Isaac Asimov's 3 laws formed one of the earliest ethics systems for robots and artificially created beings, but aren't necessarily accurate or complete. 100 years after Asimov's birth, what approaches are being taken in the practical development of robots? What is real AI, and how far away are we from it? So if you haven't read, I mean, obviously I, Robot was one of the quintessential Asimov's books. I think I'm backwards right now in my presentation, but Robot Dreams was one of the ones that I got really into, a bunch of short stories about robots. And of course he wrote The Caves of Steel and The Naked Sun about robots. And these types of stories, I think, shaped our sense of what is a robot, what is an intelligent thing. We have our own sense of what makes up human intelligence or animal intelligence. And some people think there's just like a vast difference. And some people think there's more of a continuity between animals and humans. And maybe we're not the only intelligent creature on the planet. So I want to start with the ending. So what do we mean by AI? How would we recognize it? At what point does an AI engage with ethics, or is it more how humans use it? John, do you want to start?
Yeah, one of the things that came out of my own research into this is that what we call AI now is very little like the AI in Asimov's and in classic science fiction. The AIs we have now have no ontology, no sense of the reality of the world. They can't think of other actors in a scene with them. They don't have a sense of self, and they're therefore not in a position to engage ethically with the world around them. They're immensely skilled at transforming large quantities of data into small, frequently correct analyses. but they don't have a sense of that's a person there. They have a sense that's a collection of pixels to which I can tag with the word person, so that we have to engage ethically about how we use them, but we can't engage as competing ethical beings with the AIs.
Would you guys agree?
I mean, yeah, as technology is right now, when we talk about AI, we're talking about something that is non-self-aware. That's just a series of decision-making trees and algorithms. I think that we've all heard of the concept of the Turing test or the Voight-Kampff test, which is an interesting ethics question too. You know, at what point, if it walks like a human and talks like a human and interacts like a human, at what point is it essentially human? There's a wonderful article I read years ago, it's from the 90s, called What is an Agent Exactly? Where a chatbot, again, programmed way back in the old days, was getting hit on by men on an online game. And the chatbot programmer just kept adding more and more avoid getting hit on routines. But at the end, he's like, apparently my cheap little chatbot passes a Turing test, but men trying to flirt on the internet do not. So I'll put a link to that article in the chat. But
Great.
so we
That's
do.
very
But yeah, the chatbots I think are an interesting segue into, you know, modern AI right now. The work that's been doing in predictive text and speech emulation has been incredible, and it's all to serve the purpose of coming up with new call centers.
That's a great story.
Yeah. What are your thoughts,
You
Aaron?
you asked, you know, what is AI? And that is something that's an interesting question, because that definition has changed over time, sort of in sort of the popular culture. You know, there used to be a time when people thought we would have to create AI to solve chess. And then chess was solved and they said, well, the program that did it is not AI because it just does X, Y, Z. And then we thought the same thing about image classification. And then we thought the same thing about playing a video game. And then we thought the same thing about Siri. You know, 10 years ago, you told someone about Siri, they would say, oh yeah, that's AI. Today, do people consider Siri AI? Some people do. Some people would say, no, that's just, you know, whatever. So there's a sort of a thing where AI is always, in the pop culture sense, it's always something that hasn't been done yet. And then in the science perspective, there's a lot of things that are AI, including things that I think a lot of things the public would not consider to be AI. And then your other question of where do they interact with ethics? It actually interacts with ethics at all levels. It's not just when you have a super intelligence that interacts with ethics. It's not just when you have a self-driving car. Obviously, there's a lot of ethics issues with self-driving car when you put an AI in a system where it can do things. But even if you have an AI system that is just making recommendations or is just performing classification, there's a lot of ethical issues that can arise.
Has actual impact on society. So, so yeah, and I just wanted to mention, since you haven't brought it up, at one point Marie mentioned machine intelligence. There's kind of some, the way I see it, kind of three major classifications of AI if you actually work in the AI field. There's kind of like neural networks, machine intelligence that you train with data sets in order to do things like recognize patterns. Pattern recognition is something that humans are historically incredibly good at. So that's sort of that question of, you know, is it AI if it can pretend to be us, or is it AI if it can fool us as to whether or not it is us, right? But then there's also a whole segment of artificial intelligence development where people are specifically trying to model human style cognition. So the company I worked with for a while, SOAR Technology, that was a spinoff off of the University of Michigan project to develop SOAR, which is a language that ultimately kind of boils down to decision trees, but they were trying to figure out how to make it more efficient than that. How do you bring in senses like affect, like, you know, we were really affected by this experience, so we'll remember it more readily, or we've forgotten these experiences because they reinforced, they didn't turn out to be that important to our experience. And then there's also an area of artificial intelligence that has to do with intelligent agents, but not so much like this is a software construct that is in and of itself a single thing that has intelligence, but rather a group of agents that all together show behavior or capabilities that allow them to make what appear to be intelligent assessments, perceptions, or decisions, kind of like a swarm of insects. Which brings me to the next question, you know, what is a robot and where are we on that side of the picture? I know we've got robots anywhere from microscopic robots that do medical work, nanoscopic really, to you know, big machinery and space.
Yeah,
ships.
that's the notion that we have a single consciousness of our own is a very strong one, poorly supported by the evidence. I think the best picture of how we think is that we've got like a 5% unit on top of our head or on top of our mind, which actually makes conscious decisions. And about 95% of our thinking is instinctive and largely correct, like that book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman. That most of our thinking is fast, automatic, reliable, and not entirely conscious. And we have something of a swarm mind inside our heads where we have a face recognition unit, a biography unit, a name unit, and so forth. So it's unfair for us to criticize robots for showing swarm intelligence when at a certain level, this is the kind of intelligence that we're showing. You know, it's just one swarm being nasty about another swarm.
Mm.
I think also that we're being a little misled by trying to think of artificial intelligence in terms of a kind of autistic human. If we ask what are these artificial systems good at and where are they complementary to how we think, I think we'll get much better results. We know that they're really good. I mean, this is how Deep Blue, I guess it was, won at chess, not by thinking the way a grandmaster does, but by just crunching huge quantities of data, something we're not that good at. So we ought to look for things that we're not good at and throw the AIs at that kind of question.
But I think that gets into one of the ethics questions that perhaps we could talk about, which is that at this point we've put an incredible amount of data out into the public sphere, or you know, in corporate spheres that software can see and access in many cases, and we can't look through all that data very effectively as human beings. Our information processing is not that fast compared to computers. But the computers can. And so in some ways, some computer systems know even more about us than we know about us. And we're starting to see situations with hackers, with software agents and stuff like that, where they're manipulating our perception of reality. Or at least on the internet, they can pretend to be human and we get fooled. Is that kind of part of what you were getting at, Aaron, with regard to?
And that gets into some very serious ethical questions. One of my favorite examples was from a father who saw that his daughter was getting a pregnancy-related advertisements on Target and complained vigorously to Target about this. It turned out that Target's AI algorithms had worked out the daughter was pregnant, perhaps even before she had worked that out from her emotional responses on the system, and had just fired off its ads in accordance with that for like Blander Foods and Midol or what have you. And the father is just outraged, confronts the daughter, and discovers that Target was right, the AI was right, and perhaps even his daughter had not known what was going on.
Mm.
And this is not intended to manipulate the daughter in a certain sense, except to get her to spend money.
But yeah, I think that the ethical question is about manipulation, right? And misrepresentation. If a chatbot is a human, I mean, most of them are designed to misrepresent. They're designed to mislead. The chatbots for your Russian software company all talk like they're from the United States, and are named Bob, and you.
Gladys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is a big thing of people creating bots to achieve some sort of effect. And that's sort of one of the malicious uses of AI. But there's also the same sort of, in your question, I think you mentioned misinformation or something along those lines. But that can also be achieved even without a intentionally malicious actor. Obviously, intentionally malicious actors can exacerbate it. But for example, the Facebook recommendation algorithm or other similar recommendation algorithms that recommend you content that it knows you will like, and not just that it knows you like, but that it knows will stoke your emotional interest.
Yeah.
The effect is that it can put people in filter bubbles, it can put people in information silos, and it can foster extremism and inability to listen to or ignorance of opinions and perspectives different from what one is already thinking. And that can be harmful to society, and that can increase misinformation and stuff. And we see Facebook grappling with this now, and it's kind of a difficult thing, and yeah.
Facebook has a built-in interest in not getting too effective in controlling this manipulation. We know where their money is coming from, after all, and they're trying to walk a delicate balance between the appearance of virtue and its reality.
Yeah. So one of the effects some people have described from social media is that people have actually been getting more disassociated from each other, or at least from groups that seem significantly different from each other. And so I've seen a lot of comments in the last year that it seems like we're less and less likely to be civil with each other. And this is potentially a situation that could be exacerbated by robots, right? Because now we can get drones that spy on each other's properties. I've had people who've had those problems. We can get, I've had people who shot down drones that were spying on their properties, and then there's this question of whether or not robots might themselves have capabilities to, in the most dramatic extent, kill people, but at least to spy on people, right? 'Cause they can sit somewhere and watch with cameras, and cameras have gotten very cheap. And I think it was probably 15 years ago the first time we sent a swarm of spider type drones into a building and had them successfully scan and model the entire building and where everybody was in it without anybody noticing they were there. So this technology has been around for a while. Is this something you're worried about? Like what do you ethical issues do you see there? And do you think we're doing anything right now to grapple with them at the technological level, or are we just leaving it up to the users? What do you see happening?
Well, there was a big shift recently when Apple upped its privacy requirements so that people could opt out of targeted Facebook ads. And something like 85% or more of Apple users chose to do so. I myself had actually already set the privacy settings to max a couple of years ago, since I'm a professional programmer, and I knew about that. But I just assumed.
And the age of Google, like, if you have a house that's run by your Google Nest, it knows all kinds of things about what's going on in your.
Well, I think I think it's telling, and it's the most today kind of thing, because when we write science fiction, we're always writing about the future. We're writing about today and our today's concerns. I'm thinking about Murderbot, and the Murderbot Diaries, where the company, part of the reason why Murderbot has a camera and can record things is to spy on customers and provide, proprietary data to the company. Also thinking about Cory Doctorow's Little Brother, which is a good novel about surveillance state situations. Obviously, we've been working really hard. A lot of activists have been working really hard to make digital rights management more transparent to the public. But yeah, definitely. As we get more robots and we get these home control robots, which again would have been science fiction when I was a kid, the Siri or Google Plus. I think I even wrote a story about it in high school. Like, and you have a robot, a thing that controls your home and turns on the lights. And
Those
Let
are
me, yeah, toss out a speculation of the legal kind for the assembled multitude. The origin of law, I remember from my histories of English law, English common law, and so forth, can be traced to a large extent to the principle of trespass being extended to a wider and wider scale, where we say you're on this side, you're on that side with respect to property, your cattle, your chattels, and so forth. And much of, like, laws about libel are partly laws about trespass. Which information do you own? Which information do other people have a right to? What's part of the commons? What's part of the walled garden that every householder owns to themselves? And we might find ourselves wanting to extend the principle of trespass into the digital realm. Say there are certain aspects of your digital existence which are your property and may not be passed along to other people, no matter how much money there is in doing that. That would seem to be an occasion to take, it's always better with law to extend it than to try to invent new law, since law moves very slowly anyway.
Were you going to add something, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that is a great goal, but there's a lot of difficulties. I'll also just add, talking about Google Home and Alexa and all these things, I'm going to go ahead and recommend that people don't use them at all. I actually go as far as, for privacy reasons, if someone else owns one and I'm in their home, I'll say, hey, can you unplug that? So I'll do that. So I'm putting that out there. I recommend / offer people do that as well, because this is a tough issue with land. You can go there. If someone's on it, you can see them on it, unless like they go when you're not there or something. But like with someone just said most people's phones are doing the same thing, but you can turn a phone off. Yeah, I mean, that's also a problem, but you can address that as well. It's an issue in the digital world because there's what companies commit to. Like, we do want to create, and it has to come from the public. It can't just be like people who care about it talking about it. It has to be a public. Like, I'm encouraged by what John said about how a bunch of Apple users opted out. It has to be the public pressure. And in Europe, we have the GDPR that's been helpful. It gets companies to commit to this kind of thing. Then there's also a matter of what is technologically possible, which is sometimes a matter of a company being willing to put in the time to perform the innovation. Like, Facebook made their own system. Maybe they should put in the time to develop some things about it. But also some things are just not technically possible or not technically possible yet. And that has to be taken into account, not to say it's okay, but to say, well, what do we do about it physically? And then there's also what is verifiable technologically, because a company can say whatever they want. And maybe a big company you'll trust more or less, depending on your perceptions of things. But there has to be, because in the real world, it's, there can be difficulties in verifying something, but if you want to build a building on someone else's land, you can't hide that, so there's not verifying that you can't, so that's verifiable. Whereas stealing or taking someone's information, even, with their consent, is very easy in the online world. And so, creating some ability to verify the privacy, that people who want privacy get the privacy they want, is also a concern.
Yeah, and I would add to it that if panels like this can generate a general ethical feeling that just because a programmer can build something entertaining doesn't mean that he or she should do so. That the programmers themselves normally do what their employers ask them to do. But if there's a general sense in the culture that some things are out of bounds, like what is the hormonal status of the people on Facebook, that would help slow down this code and also help whistleblowers to make it more, encourage them to make it public. A lot of it's cultural.
Yeah, I think in the sort of the classic SF, there was a fair amount of prediction that we would have something like your smartphone, right? That would be your personal assistant. That was what we originally called them, right? Personal digital assistant, and it would work for your interest. And like I was just reading Purnell and Niven's A Mote in God's Eye and The Gripping Hand, and they had, you know, in your house, you could just speak to your robot and your robot would make your appointments, or your machine or whatever it was. But it was this intelligent thing that would negotiate things for you. And in another of their series, they had maybe they had you know, an AI, but it developed within a family, and the family owned it, and it, you know, it pursued that family's economic interests. We didn't so much anticipate this situation where large corporations have these things at their beck and call, and they aren't quite AI yet, right? But they're moving in that direction. But we still sort of have this sense that they must have some sort of motive. And so as we build motives into them, there's that opportunity to grapple with these ethics if we actually do that on purpose. I was interested to read, I don't know if you guys have read Charlie Jane Anders' All the Birds in the Sky, but it stipulates someone who grows up a witch and someone who grows up an amazing techie inventor person. And together between them, they kind of raise an AI that then goes out into the internet and wanders about by its own for a while, and then shows up again as part of the operating system of personal assistant technology, in which it turns out that part of what somehow or another makes the AI happy is to help other people not be lonely. So it raises the odds that they will succeed in their social life. So that was All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. And that was really interesting to me, this idea that, you know, we'll often think of AI as having, you know, I don't know, their own self perpetuation as their primary goal, or all become murder bots and try to kill the human race. But this was a completely different twist. So
yeah, and Ian Banks's series, his Extraordinary Future, where AIs run everything, and they've been programmed to help people, which is great. On the other hand, they've also been programmed to extend human values to all nearby alien civilizations, and by hook or by crook, they go about doing that as well. They're particularly good at combat because they don't mind dying. They just reload a backup image of themselves and get back into the fight.
Of combat, we have a question from Paul Calhoun. It says, what is the panel's view on robots engaging in a form of self-defense as discerning agents, or as an extension of their owner's property in places where it is legal to use force to defend their property? Aaron, you want to take that first?
Sure, I can answer a little bit. I mean, I think I'll try to give a general answer, but I think it's a very, very much case by case question. And I don't mean like literally case by case, but I mean a specific category of scenario. So if you have a specific kind of a robot and specific kind of self-defense situation in mind, I encourage you to submit another question to get more specific, but in the Q&A window, yeah. But I would say generally, I think human safety comes before robot safety, but it's also okay to have some systems that are going to interact with the world care about themselves. There is a case where there was a robot put in to give people information in a train station, and people abused the robot. They were like playing with it and making it do things, and maybe, I forget if they were physically injuring it, but that has also happened to a different robot. Now, on the one hand, these robots, whatever comes in the future, these robots were not alive, but it was still, it was bad for a number of reasons, but it was also bad in that ideally we would want a robot to walk around in the world without being destroyed. So self-defense against, I don't know, it's difficult for me to imagine a situation where someone would attack a robot and then it'd be okay for the robot to injure them in response. But when you're talking about property rights, if you, defending property, if that robot is part of someone's house, how is that different than having an electric fence or some other sort of measure? I think there could be some similarities. I think there could be a lot of differences. So if there's a more specific scenario you have in mind, please put it down. But those are some general thoughts.
Marie, did you?
No, I was just going to say it's interesting because I find the idea of using force to protect property to be itself unethical. That, yeah, you shouldn't, if it don't bleed, it don't matter. It's stuff. You should never use force to defend property. But if it was decided by that society that it was okay to do that, the question comes down to, is this robot self-aware? Is this robot a creature, or is this robot merely a tool? In which case the morality of the robot's actions are the morality of the owners and programmers.
Yeah, there's also the question of perception, right? Can the robot in some way evaluate the possible results of whatever action it's going to take? In our email discussion, Marie mentioned, bias and training of machine intelligence, garbage in, garbage out. If the people who program the robot are not available or are not able to imagine certain scenarios, they might not anticipate. It kind of goes back to your electric fence thing, Aaron. You can warn people about the electric fence, but there might still be situations where there was an accident where somebody ends up being killed.
Yeah,
I'd
love to.
I'd like to interject. There's a principle in English common law that you can't set man traps.
Oh, yeah.
Because they eliminate trial for the person who has violated who has committed trespass. Well, if you can't set man traps, you can't program your AI to open fire. It's obviously
it's illegal to put bear traps.
Yeah, this principle is like 1,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, we may be able to just extend.
I also want to say, when I was making the comparison to the electric fence, I was not envisioning a robot opening fire on anybody as a comparison. I think that would be extremely different.
What about
but I think
what about deadly sarcasm?
But to follow up with Paul's follow-up, he says, to take an example, a delivery robot is attacked by someone.
Yeah, I would like, before we get to Paul, I'd like to respond to Mary's comment, actually.
Oh, to Marie's comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, because she made a great point about, I thought, a very interesting question about, let's say you have this robot and people disagree about what is moral to do, or even if people don't disagree, what happens if the robot does something immoral, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or intentionally on the part of the robot, but it wasn't necessarily known ahead of time? Who's responsible, the programmer, the owner, or the person who, incurred physically prompted it, whether they realize it or not. And this is sort of a bit of a moral question, but I sort of take the position that the owner is responsible. For any device or robot that they purchase, they're responsible for that, and they're responsible to a certain degree for what it does. There is with some exceptions, but generally. But also the programmer, I actually say bears some responsibility. And I say this as a person who is creating robots. In general, you see sort of two different kind of ethical frameworks out there. There's the people who build it are not responsible. It's just the people who who use it, and then there's the people who say, like, yes, the people who build it are responsible. And in that latter group, you often see people not, just opting out of building anything that has the potential to be wrong. I take a little bit of a different view, which is that I do believe that people who build something bear some responsibility for how it's used, because you have to make decisions about making it usable, about making it safe. And those are things that engineers and managers and companies need to be concerned about when they're building a product or system. And it doesn't mean that you're responsible for literally anything that occurs, but you have to put some thought into it. And I also don't think it means necessarily that you should opt out of doing something necessarily, although there are some things that I think a person should opt out of. But I think it's also important to build a thing, but with safety built in, if it can be.
I would
So
concur
are there
with
things
that.
that you think we should never program robots to do then?
There's
Yeah, probably.
there's unintended consequences whenever you try to whenever we try to train ethical behavior into systems, right? When we were talking about corporations having control earlier, I just kept thinking about corporations are, in a sense, designed to be sociopathic. They're designed to be immoral actors. How can we fix that? The unintended, like in my role as a programmer at my day job, we had a task to create a machine learning algorithm to read medical school applications, hoping that it would free up faculty time from doing that and predispose which applications were likely to come in. And one of the first things the darn thing did was like, well, looking at your past applications and who made it in and comparing it to these ones, obviously you don't want any minority students. So we're just going to cut them out right away. And we were like, oh no.
Yeah, well, and that raises the importance of testing, right? Like as an engineer, I remember one of the early stories in machine intelligence training was about a project that was trying to do image recognition, and their training set of images was all photos that either did or did not have Russian tanks in them. And they were very excited. They found that their system was able, like 100%, to tell the difference between a picture that did or did not have Russian tanks in them. And they thought it was extremely effective. And then they brought in a different data set and it didn't work at all. And when they went back and looked at it, they realized that it's actually the most consistent thing about their original training set was that all the pictures that had tanks in them were taken on bright and sunny days.
Yeah,
that was what it was really good at recognizing. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk about that problem in my talk tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That these systems, the AI we have today is extremely fragile. That if you change the training set a little bit, you get different results. I have a wonderful example of how you can trick AI into looking at an infant and thinking it sees an ostrich. And this is, at this point with AI so fragile, I really have to go to Aaron's point and say the programmer is responsible not only for making it as robust as possible, but for apprising the customers of his code or her code that it is fragile and it should not be employed except with appropriate supervision. I remember writing some medical software which had to produce life or death test conclusions with respect to fetuses and genetic testing. And I wrote the program with every safeguard I could. And then I ran not only the results, but the methodology by the lab director and had him look over my shoulder at the if-else conditions. Because I knew that somebody would die if I got it wrong, and that scared me.
Yeah, so there's this question of AI, and then when you add it to the robots, then you have this idea. I think a lot of our classic sense of robot just basically has to do with something that is mobile, right? That can move around with some autonomy. And so that means you have the potential risk of that robot moving away from this guided supervision you're talking about and then, you know, going off on its own and maybe making poor decisions. And then of course there's this question of, do people even recognize it as a robot? Right now, I feel we're pretty far away. I mean, like, we have obviously special effects in film where we're getting very close to being able to represent something that gets past the uncanny valley of this looks humanoid, but actually it just freaks us out because it also looks like a dead thing. In terms of, you know, showing something that shows emotions or whatever. Like, I remember MIT Media Lab a long time ago had a really fun project trying to get computers to show emotions and studying the basic components of the face that actually reflect our emotions. But as far as a robot walking around, I think we were we had all these images, we had R2-D2 and all that sort of stuff. And while something in the back of our head said, well, how does R2-D2 get around in the swamp? Like, now it's very real. We know that for anything, vehicles on the road is one thing, but for anything, any other problem, it's actually pretty hard to make a robot that can manage balance and navigate both ways through a complicated terrain. If anybody's really interested in that particular problem, Boston Dynamics has some wonderful, sometimes hilarious videos out on YouTube. But actually a lot of our things now, people are just really focused on flying, because that's a less complicated problem in truth. So I don't know how soon we will see any kind of like Android style robots or the kind of robots that would fool you into thinking that the robot was a human.
I'm almost going to guarantee, I will put my money down now that when we have robots that can fool you that they're human, they will be sex bots. There's been the real doll industry has been doing tremendous things. If you look at some of the things they're doing, you can get real dolls now that chat with you, that have artificial chat program that sends you texts like during the day, I've been missing you.
Yeah.
I can't agree with you more. The first use of every significant technology is for sex. In the early days of printing, the three kinds of things they printed were the Bible, gossip about the royal family, and scandalous doings in the villages. You know, that basically, and the pornography industry has led tech field after tech field, including the internet, to new, if heights is the right word, heights.
I've seen that here in New York. We had one of the very earliest daguerreotype studios, and you know, and an acknowledged secret, I guess, was that one of the main things that people did at that studio, especially as you got toward the Civil War, was get naughty pictures taken to send to people who were far away, or for people to take with them as they traveled, so they would have something. So we're getting close to the end. We're at almost 4:45. If anybody has any more questions, we sort of had a rhetorical one. Levin asked, don't most tech leaders believe that their progress is moral or ethical? Yeah. You know, everybody likes to be the hero of their own story. If there are any more questions, throw them in there. But right now, I wanted to focus on, you know, what have we maybe missed in this conversation, or do you have any last thoughts? John, why don't you lead off?
Okay. What AI is missing now is what people call an ontology, a sense of the real world. It has taken the human species and the species before us 3.8 billion years to build up an ontology, to build up an intuitive sense of the world around us. And it's not surprising that the last 50 years or so of progress have come nowhere near doing that. So that I think that most ethical questions about AI are going to be about how we use it, unintended side effects, AI as tool, you know, like traffic jams versus waves of Twitter nonsense and so forth. And that the extraordinary scenarios in fiction are going to be extraordinary for another, perhaps 2 generations.
Okay, Marie, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I was like, oh, this went so fast. I really wanted to talk about robots as labor.
Oh yeah.
In my
Yeah.
novel, Galactic Hellcats, I have some sex bot characters who are great. And my buddy is like, Marie, you're a bad Marxist because you've got this exploited sex workers. And I was like, hey, those sex bots belong to a union and their work is adequately compensated. But yeah, at what point what point is a robot worker have workers' rights? I think Annalee Newitz's Autonomous is a great novel that addresses that.
Yeah, and I just want to
Or
throw
check
out,
out
I love
Black
the webcomic Questionable Content, which is full of AI.
Yeah,
And
that's a
they've
good one.
engaged with some of those questions, including like if an AI convict, is let back out in the world, is it ethical to give them, some shabby piece of junk for them to exist in? Aaron.
Yeah, so I also am a fan of, I've read Questionable Content, and I've enjoyed all their AI antics, although I just have to say none of it is very realistic, but it's fun to read, so that's fine. I enjoy it, but I just have to say that. So I would say, what's been missing, or not really missing from the conversation, but one more thing I'd like to add is that, who has the responsibility in a particular robot situation is up, it can be up for debate, but who has the responsibility to change, to promote the idea of ethics in these situations? I think that's on all of us. Any one of us who contributes to one of these systems, I think should keep it in mind, keep safety in mind. And for some people, maybe that'll mean not working on something or not doing something. For others, it might mean in the work that they do, having safety built in or talking to someone about it. And for even if you have no relation to it at all, if you're just a normal consumer consuming these products, make the choices about what you do and don't purchase. Make the choices about what you do and don't partake in, and what websites you use and what you do and don't use. And that'll help with this.
I would suggest using the website DuckDuckGo for searches,
Yes.
because that does not filter your search results based on your previous queries.
And read the terms and conditions, and don't be afraid to not use a website or service.
Yeah. Because otherwise I and everybody I know get sucked into the bubble of agreement.
Mm. You did read that end user license agreement, right?
Right, and I spent a full 50 milliseconds on it.
But also the privacy policy.
Yes, another 50 milliseconds.
The changing privacy policy.
Right, that's where they get you. They say if you want to continue to use the service,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that gets
No,
into
no.
the whole ethical question of
Yeah.
weighted decisions and forced decisions.
Yeah. I'm also going to hang out in the Watertown Gather Room if anybody wants to. And there were some questions that we didn't get to answer, and so I'll be happy to talk about those in the Watertown Gather Room with anybody who wants to come.
Great. Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to keep talking about this, we can see you on the Discord, and it's a fascinating conversation. We could obviously just talk for hours. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Marie and John and Aaron, for taking time and your input. And now I want to read all your stories, Marie.
They're full of working robots.
Good.
Yeah, I got one about the changing roles of dock workers, which is about an unintended robot revolution on a dock. Workers' rights.
Excellent.
How do we get into? I should get the water table room.
Yeah, you go to Discord and then you scroll through the rooms on the side, the different channels, and you'll see the water table under the programming things.
Thanks.
Lori was going to put the link in the chat, did she? Aha! There it is. Magic.
Super lazy response. I just click a link.
There's
Okay.
Okay.
That really did go fast. I feel like we could have talked for 3 hours.
Yeah, there was just way more than I went there's some like the Oxford. There was some dictionary of philosophy which had a 30-page article on ethics and robotics, and we covered like 2 of the topics out of that.
Yeah, and I totally didn't get into, I looked at, there's actually a whole Wikipedia page on the 3 laws of robotics, and it links to all kinds of fun things, including that XKCD did a chart that was like, when you order the 3 laws in different orders, what do you get?
Yeah.
Balanced world versus murder bots versus,
There was a beautiful example in one of the iRobot stories of a robot who's been programmed with a large instinct of self-preservation and a small instinct of obeying orders, because it's a very valuable exploratory robot and it's supposed to take good care of itself. And it gets stuck in a situation where the order is weakly phrased, so it doesn't take risks that its human masters need it to take for their own survival. And it gets stuck into a loop caught between the contradiction of the 2nd and 3rd laws.
Mm-hmm. Well,
It's a very clever story.
So we'll see you all in Discord and around for the rest of the weekend.
Yes. Bye.